50 feet high, 10 feet thick, and stretching as far as the eye can see. That's the wall that keeps us safe, or so they say. From my perch on the patrol walkway, the cold pre-dawn air biting through the worn fabric of my uniform, I can almost believe it. Almost. The automated turrets, their barrels gleaming dully in the faint light, swivel silently, their motion sensors scanning the desolate expanse beyond. Below, the city of Bastion is still mostly asleep, a jumble of concrete and salvaged metal, its inhabitants huddled in their cramped apartments, dreaming of a world that no longer exists. Or maybe they dream of full bellies. Food's always been a luxury, even here inside the walls. Hydroponics can only do so much, and the rations, well, let's just say nutrient paste doesn't exactly inspire culinary creativity. 20 years since the world went to hell in a handbasket, courtesy of some lab-cooked nightmare that turned people into, well, them. Ferals. That's what we call them. Twisted, mutated parodies of humanity, driven by instinct, hunger, and a rage that burns hotter than any fire. At least, that's what's drilled into us from the day we're old enough to understand words. The Council's propaganda is as much a part of our daily diet as the nutrient paste. Protect Bastion, serve the Council, ferals are the enemy. The slogans are everywhere, emblazoned on every wall, broadcast over the comms, etched into the fabric of our lives. My eyes scan the wasteland, a desolate panorama of ruined buildings, skeletal skyscrapers clawing at the sky like the fingers of a dying man, and stretches of barren, poisoned earth. The bioweapon did a number on the landscape too. The soil is a patchwork of sickly colors, unnatural yellows, putrid purples, oily blacks, a grim reminder of what lies beyond our fortified sanctuary. Even the plants that manage to survive out there are drastically altered. Giant fungi, their caps wide and flat like rusted metal plates, and thorny vines thick as a man's arm, that coil and twist like wrought iron, catching the faint light with a reflective surface. I shift my weight, my pulse rifle pressing against my shoulder. Standard issue for cleansers like me. We're the city's protectors, the thin line between civilization and the abyss. We patrol the wall, maintain the defenses, and venture beyond the wire to scavenge for resources and, of course, eliminate any ferals that stray too close. We're glorified exterminators, really. But try telling that to the wide-eyed recruits who still believe in the glory of it all. The Council makes sure the propaganda machine paints us as heroes. I've been a cleanser for 10 years. 10 years of patrols, 10 years of death, 10 years of seeing things that would make most people lose their lunch or their minds. I joined up straight out of the orphanage, like most kids who grew up without parents. Mine were lost in the early days of the war, during a feral attack that breached the eastern sector. I barely remember them, just flashes of a woman's terrified face and a man's desperate shout, forever intertwined with the guttural snarls of the creatures that tore them away. That night fueled my nightmares for years and drove me to enlist. I needed to make sense of their deaths, needed to feel like I was doing something to prevent that kind of horror from happening again. Gideon, my mentor, he understood. He was a veteran, a cleanser from the old days, before the wall was even finished. He taught me everything I know about surviving in this God-forsaken world, how to track, how to fight, how to stay alive. He also taught me to think, to question, to look beyond the surface. He'd seen too much to swallow the Council's rhetoric whole. He used to tell me stories late at night, when we were out on patrol, stories about the ferals that didn't quite fit the official narrative. Stories about ferals that could communicate, that could reason, that weren't just mindless beasts. At the time, I dismissed them as the ramblings of an old man who'd spent too long staring into the abyss. Now, I'm not so sure. Gideon died 3 years ago. A routine patrol gone wrong, they said. Feral attack. They never recovered his body. I always suspected there was more to it than that. He'd been asking too many questions, poking his nose where it didn't belong. He had started to believe there might be more to the ferals than met the eye. and he wasn't shy about voicing his suspicions. I think the council silenced him. It wouldn't be the first time someone in Bastion disappeared for knowing too much. That's what keeps me up at night, the thought that he might have been right, and the implications of that possibility. The burden of carrying that doubt, that nagging suspicion, has become heavier than my rifle. The mild PTSD doesn't help either. I'm starting to see Gideon's face in the eyes of every feral I encounter, a silent accusation that I can't ignore. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. Movement in the distance catches my eye. My hand tightens on my rifle. It's still too dark to make out much detail, but there's no mistaking the silhouette of a feral. It's alone, which is unusual. They usually travel in packs. This one is smaller than most, its silhouette suggesting a more hunched posture. Its limbs, though humanoid, seem disproportionately long, with an additional joint at the elbow and knee, giving it an unsettling, insect-like appearance. The faint light catches what appears to be hardened chitinous plates along its back and limbs, reflecting the dim glow like polished stone. It's not charging the wall, though. It's just standing there, watching us. You see that? Beside me, Arlo, my patrol partner, tenses. He's young, barely a man, fresh out of training. He still has that eager, naive look in his eyes, the one that hasn't yet been dulled by the harsh realities of our existence. This is his first real patrol. "Yeah," he says, his voice a little too high, a little too tight. "Think it's scouting?" "Maybe," I say, but I don't think so. There's something different about this one. Something intelligent. The way it moves, the way it observes us, it's not like the others. It's almost as if it's studying us, trying to understand. It's unsettling. "Keep your rifle trained on it," I tell Arlo, "but don't fire unless it attacks." He looks at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "But it's a feral." "Just do it!" I snap. I don't want to shoot it. I don't know why, but I feel a strange, unsettling empathy for this creature. It wouldn't be right to just gun it down. It reminds me of one of Gideon's stories about a group of ferals he encountered that could communicate, that could reason. He said they were different, that they weren't just mindless beasts. The feral takes a step back, then another. It seems to understand that we're not going to attack, at least not yet. It turns and slowly retreats into the shadows of a ruined building. As it disappears from view, I notice something on the ground where it had been standing, something metallic. "What is that?" Arlo asks. He saw it too. "I don't know. Let's go check it out." We wait until the first rays of dawn begin to paint the sky with hues of orange and purple before making our way down from the wall and out through the gate. The air outside is different, heavy with the stench of decay. It's the smell of the wasteland, the smell of death. We move cautiously, our rifles raised. The ground is littered with wreckage, twisted metal, shattered concrete, the remnants of a world that once was. We reach the spot where the feral had been standing. I scan the area, my eyes searching for any sign of movement, any hint of danger. The lingering scent of the creature hangs in the air, a musky, earthy odor. The area is clear, but the ground where it stood shows signs of its presence. Imprints that suggest clawed feet, the talons thicker and more pronounced than any animal I know. There, lying on the ground, is the object the feral left behind. It's a piece of salvaged metal, roughly shaped, about the size of my hand. It's not a weapon, not exactly. It's more like a tool. One edge has been hammered flat, sharpened, while the other has been fashioned into a crude handle. And on its surface I see markings. They are crudely etched but distinct. Symbols. They look like a form of writing, primitive but intentional. My heart beats faster. This is it. This is the proof. This is what Gideon was talking about. It's not just a random piece of scrap. It's evidence. Evidence that the ferals are not just mindless animals. A wave of dizziness comes over me. I feel like I'm about to faint. I haven't felt this way since the night my parents were killed. My hand instinctively goes to my pocket, clutching the worn, folded photograph I always carry. It's a picture of my parents, taken before the war, their faces frozen in a moment of happiness that now feels like a lifetime ago. I stare at their images, trying to conjure the sound of their voices, the feeling of their touch, but the memories are distorted by time and trauma. A sharp pain, a familiar cocktail of grief and anger constricts my chest. I close my eyes, take a deep breath and focus on regaining control, pushing back the tide of emotions. "What is that?" Arlo asks, peering over my shoulder at the object in the dirt. I quickly pick up the tool. I can't tell him. Not yet. I carefully wrap it in a piece of cloth and tuck it into my belt. "We're done here, let's head back." I need time to think, to process. I need to figure out what this means. The encounter with the feral, the tool, the markings, they've opened a door in my mind that I can't close. The easy answers, the black and white certainties, they've all been shattered. And I have a feeling that the truth, whatever it may be, is far more complex and far more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. My life as a cleanser, my loyalty to Bastion, my understanding of the enemy, it was built on a foundation of lies. Gideon was right. He was right about everything. Now I have a new mission. I need to uncover what happened to him, to my parents. I need to learn what the Council is hiding, even if it costs me my life. Back within Bastion's walls, I found myself drawn to the restricted archives, poring over old reports, searching for any mention of unusual feral behavior, anything that mirrored Gideon's stories. The archives were a dusty, neglected corner of the data center, filled with physical files and outdated digital records, most predating the Council's rise to power. The information was incomplete, but I found hints of encounters with ferals that displayed a chilling intelligence, accounts quickly dismissed as battlefield stress or fabrication. These were not official reports, but personal logs, observations, and testimonies buried and forgotten. I had to know more. I had to see for myself. The Council's truth was a carefully constructed lie, and I could no longer live within its confines. One moonless night, I made my move. Gideon's lessons served me well. He'd shown me the city's underbelly, the blind spots in the surveillance network, the maintenance tunnels that snaked beneath the streets. These were routes used by the black market, the city's hidden circulatory system, moving contraband and secrets. He used to say, "Every system has its cracks, Corinne. You just need to know where to look." My heart hammered against my ribs as I slipped through a long disused access hatch. Each step took me further from the life I knew and deeper into the unknown. I deactivated my tracker, a small device implanted under the skin on my wrist that allows the Council to monitor the movements of all cleansers. It was a risky move, but necessary. I couldn't afford to be followed. Emerging from a concealed exit outside the city walls, I was greeted by the desolate expanse of the wasteland. Above, the sky was a vast canvas of stars, a sight rarely seen within the city's illuminated perimeter. I moved quickly, following the ridgeline, using the shadows of ruined buildings for cover. The landscape was a haunting vista of devastation. Twisted metal skeletons of skyscrapers, craters filled with stagnant, oily water, and patches of mutated vegetation that emitted a faint green light. My destination was a sector on the far edge of our usual patrol zone, a place Gideon had once mentioned, a place where he claimed to have seen evidence of organized feral activity. It was a deep crater, possibly an old quarry, shielded from view and difficult to access. It was a long and perilous journey. I encountered several feral patrols, but using the skills Gideon had taught me, I was able to avoid them, moving like a ghost through the ruins. I observed them from a distance, noting their movements, their interactions. They were more organized than I had ever seen them before, communicating through a series of rasps and clicks produced by the rapid rubbing of their hardened carapaces against their limbs, a form of stridulation. This was accompanied by deliberate, almost exaggerated movements of their bodies, a tilt of the head, a specific extension of a limb, a subtle shift in posture. These movements and sounds combined formed a complex language of gestures and percussive sounds. It was clear that they were not just mindless beasts. I finally reached the crater. It was a deep, uneven wound in the earth, its steep sides littered with loose rock and rubble. I carefully made my way down, using handholds and footholds, my boots slipping on the loose scree. At the bottom of the crater, I found a settlement. Crude structures built from salvaged metal and reinforced with scavenged concrete formed a haphazard yet functional village. The structures themselves seemed to mimic the ferals' physiology, with sloping roofs that resembled their carapaces and support beams that curved like their limbs. I saw ferals moving among the structures, some carrying tools, others tending to small fires. This was no random aggregation of beasts, it was a community. I watched them for hours, concealed in the shadows, my mind struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with everything I had been taught. They were organized, disciplined, and, dare I say, civilized, in their own grotesque way. I saw a group of them working together to repair a damaged structure, their movements coordinated, their communication efficient. I saw another group gathered around a fire, sharing what looked like cooked food. They were not the monsters I had been trained to kill. They were survivors, just like us. They even had children. They were smaller, weaker, but they were clearly being cared for, protected. As I continued to observe them, I noticed one feral that stood out from the others. It was larger, more imposing, with an air of authority. It moved with a sense of purpose, directing the others, resolving disputes. It was clearly the leader, a prime, as Gideon had called them. This was the one who held the key to understanding their society, their motivations, their history. My observations were cut short. A twig snapped behind me, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the stillness of the crater. I whirled around, my pulse rifle raised, my finger on the trigger. Two ferals stood before me, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They were not primes, but they were larger, stronger than any feral I had encountered before. Their heads were stretched, with a pronounced ridge above the eyes, and their mouths were filled with rows of serrated teeth that seemed too large for their jaws. Their skin was not merely leathery, but covered in overlapping plates of a chitinous material, like the carapace of a giant insect, giving them a segmented appearance. I was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. My mission, my quest for the truth, had led me to a dead end. The ferals advanced, their intentions clear. I raised my rifle, but I hesitated. Could I really shoot them? Could I really kill creatures that were, in their own way, just trying to survive? Before I could make a decision, I was overwhelmed. They were too fast, too strong. One of them slammed into me, knocking the rifle from my hands. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. The other one pounced, its claws raking across my arm, tearing through my uniform and into my flesh. I cried out in pain, a searing agony that radiated through my body. I was disarmed, wounded, and at their mercy. This was it. This was how it ended. My life, my mission, everything, was about to be extinguished in this desolate crater, at the hands of the very creatures I had come to understand. I closed my eyes, bracing for the final blow. At least, in the end, I would know the truth, even if it was only for a fleeting moment before darkness consumed me. Consciousness returned in fragments, a jumbled mess of pain and disorientation. I was lying on a hard surface, the rough texture of rock pressing against my cheek. My left arm was on fire, a searing pain radiating from deep wounds. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. I was bound, my wrists and ankles secured by thick, fibrous cords that bit into my skin. It was a rudimentary rope, but it was incredibly strong. My eyes, still adjusting to the dim light, slowly began to make sense of my surroundings. I was inside one of the feral structures, a crude dwelling built from salvaged metal and rock. The walls were uneven, put together with a surprising degree of ingenuity. Through the gaps in the walls, I saw the light of the fires outside. I could hear the ferals, the percussive chorus of their communication, a complex rhythm of rasps and clicks produced by the rapid rubbing of their hardened carapaces against their limbs. It was a language I was beginning to understand, a language of survival, of community, of a shared existence in a broken world. It wasn't just noise, as I once thought, but a complex system of communication, more advanced than the grunts and roars we attributed to them. They were speaking to one another, discussing me, no doubt. I could discern certain repeated patterns in their communication, patterns that correlated with specific actions or situations. Several ferals entered the structure, their forms silhouetted against the firelight. They were the primes that Gideon had spoken of. They approached me slowly, their multifaceted eyes like polished gemstones fixed on me. I could see the intelligence in those eyes, the curiosity, the awareness. One of them, the largest of the group, and likely the one in charge, gestured with a clawed hand, and the others began to examine my wounds. They moved with surprising dexterity, their touch almost gentle. They were not trying to hurt me, not anymore at least. They were tending to my injuries. One of them produced a thick substance, a dark green paste that smelled of earth and something else. They applied it to my arm, and a wave of coolness spread through the injured limb, dulling the searing pain. It was some kind of natural anesthetic, perhaps derived from the mutated plants of the wasteland. Over the next few days, I remained their captive, but my fear gradually gave way to a grudging respect, then to something akin to understanding. They brought me food, a strange unidentifiable meat, and water collected in hollowed-out gourds. The Prime, the one I had seen directing the others in the crater, seemed particularly interested in me. It would often observe me for long periods, its head tilted to one side, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. I tried to communicate, using the few words I'd gleaned from their conversations, mimicking their gestures and the percussive sounds of their language. I pointed to myself and said, "Corin." Then I pointed to them and made the clicking sounds that seemed to denote their group, their tribe. The Prime responded, repeating my name in its rasping, clicking language, then pointing to itself and making a series of sounds that I interpreted as its name, Crete. It was a breakthrough, a small but significant step towards bridging the chasm between our two species. Through painstaking effort, using gestures, mimicry, and a growing vocabulary of their percussive language, I began to piece together their story. Crete, using a combination of gestures and the rhythmic rasping and clicking of his kind's unique communication, showed me images etched onto pieces of salvaged metal. They were crude but powerful depictions of their recent history, a visual record of their struggle for survival after the bioweapons deployment. I saw images of humans, normal humans, transforming, their bodies contorting in agony as the mutations took hold. There were scenes of chaos and fear as these newly formed ferals fled the cities, driven by pain and primal instinct. Then, images of the early days in the wasteland, ferals, alone and terrified, struggling against the elements and their own mutated bodies. Slowly I saw the emergence of the primes, the first to regain some semblance of control, their intelligence coming back to life. Images showed them banding together, helping others, building the first rudimentary shelters. And finally, I saw images of Bastion, of the wall, a symbol of the humans who had rejected them, followed by depictions of cleansers on patrol, portrayed as bringers of death, their pulse rifles spitting energy blasts. The message was clear. Bastion and the humans within were the enemy, the ones who hunted them, who refused to see them as anything but monsters. Then Crete revealed the most shocking truth of all. It spoke of a small group of humans who had come to them years ago, seeking peace, offering knowledge. They were scientists, researchers who believed that the ferals were not mindless monsters but a new form of life, deserving of understanding, not extermination. Among them, Crete said, pointing to a crudely drawn image of a man with a kind face and a determined gaze, was Gideon. My mentor was not killed by ferals, as the council claimed. He had been trying to help them. And then, Crete continued, another image. this one depicting a group of figures in cleanser uniforms, their weapons raised. The Council. They had discovered Gideon's efforts and silenced him, along with the other scientists, making it look like a feral attack. The same drawing depicted 2 more humans being executed. My parents. The truth hit me. My parents, like Gideon, had been murdered by the Council, not killed by ferals. They had been part of the group trying to make peace, to understand. The Council, terrified of losing control, had eliminated them, burying the truth beneath a mountain of lies and propaganda. The weight of this revelation was crushing. The betrayal, absolute. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had fought for, was a lie. The Council, they were the true monsters, not the ferals. They had built their power on a foundation of deceit, perpetuating a cycle of violence for their own selfish ends. I had been a fool, a weapon in their hands, but no more. The Council, I said, the word a bitter curse on my lips. I pointed to the image of Bastion, then made the gesture for death, for destruction. Crete understood. He responded with a series of rapid clicks and a sharp, decisive gesture, the hardened plates on his back rubbing together to form a sound of agreement. He too sought justice, retribution for the wrongs that had been committed against his people. An alliance, however unlikely, was forged in that moment. An alliance born of shared loss and a common enemy. We were no longer predator and prey, but allies united against a greater evil. Months passed. My time among the ferals, initially a captivity, became a period of learning, of understanding, of preparation. I learned their language, their customs, their ways of survival. I helped them improve their defenses, sharing my knowledge of cleanser tactics and weaponry. They in turn taught me about the wasteland, about the mutated flora and fauna, about the hidden resources that could be found in the ruins. I was no longer Corin, the cleanser. I was a bridge between 2 worlds, a harbinger of a future yet to be written. We began to plan our next move. We would take the fight to Bastion, to the Council. We would expose their lies and break their grip on power. I was ready to fight for a future where humans and ferals could coexist, a future where the walls of fear and prejudice would finally come crashing down. The time for hiding was over. The time for revolution had begun. We would show them that civilization comes in many forms, and even the most grotesque and mutated creatures have a right to exist. The pale, pre-dawn light filtered through the grimy windows of Augustus's office. He stood by the window, a tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the faint glow, his eyes focused on the city below. Bastion, his city, was stirring. Even from this height, he could sense the undercurrent of unease that had gripped the populace in recent weeks. The reports of increased feral activity, the rumors of a cleanser's defection, Corin's defection, a name that echoed in Augustus's mind like a discordant note, had sown seeds of doubt and discontent. He steepled his fingers, his meticulously manicured nails catching the light. He had ruled Bastion with an iron fist since its inception, guiding it through the turbulent years following the bioweapon war. He had built it from nothing, transforming a desolate ruin into a haven. He had done what was necessary. He turned from the window, his eyes scanning the opulent office, the leather-bound books lining the walls, the antique globe in the corner, the heavy oak desk that served as a symbol of his authority. Everything here spoke of his power, his control. He had risen to power during the chaos, promising security, stability, order. And he had delivered, at a cost, of course. Some called him a dictator, a tyrant. He preferred to think of himself as a realist, a pragmatist. He had made the hard choices, the necessary choices, to ensure Bastion's survival. A sharp rap on the door broke the silence. "Enter," Augustus commanded, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried an undercurrent of authority. The door swung open, and Everett strode in, his cleanser uniform immaculate, his expression grim. He was a younger man, but his eyes reflected the focus of a battle-hardened soldier. He was Augustus's most trusted lieutenant, his enforcer, the one who carried out his will without question, without hesitation. Or so it had been until recently. Lately, Everett had been different, distracted, troubled. "Report," Augustus ordered, his eyes fixed on Everett, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of disloyalty. He trusted Everett, his loyalty proven over the years since he'd recruited him into the cleansers. But these were uncertain times. "The patrols are reporting increased feral activity along the perimeter, sir," Everett reported. "They're probing our defenses, testing our strength, and there are more rumors about Corin." "Rumors?" Augustus's voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip. "What rumors?" "They say he's joined them, sir, that he's leading them." Augustus was silent for a long moment. Corin. The name echoed in his thoughts, a problem he had hoped to contain. He had always known Corin was different, too idealistic, too compassionate, even when Everett had first brought him to Augustus's attention, straight from the orphanage where Corin and Everett had grown up together. A raw recruit, but a skilled one. He had hoped that the harsh realities of life as a cleanser would break him, mold him into the soldier Bastion needed. But Corin had proven to be more resilient than he anticipated. He remembered the fire in Corin's eyes, the defiance in his voice, shortly after Gideon's supposed death in the field. He should have dealt with him then, silenced him before he could become a threat. But Everett had vouched for him, pleaded for leniency. Everett and Corin had a bond, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of the orphanage. "And what do you believe, Everett?" Augustus asked, his voice soft, almost gentle, but with an underlying edge that made Everett shift uncomfortably. Everett hesitated for a moment. "I don't know what to believe, sir," he finally admitted. "Corin was my friend, my brother. We grew up together in the orphanage, but the things they're saying, the things he's supposedly doing, it's hard to reconcile with the man I knew." "Loyalty is a virtue, Everett," Augustus said. "But it must be tempered with reason. Corin has chosen his path, a path that leads to the destruction of everything we have built. He is a threat, a danger to Bastion, and he must be eliminated, along with the ferals he now commands." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You understand, don't you?" "Yes, sir," Everett said, his voice firm. "I understand." But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the citizens, the desperation in the faces of the ferals. He had heard the whispers, the rumors of Corin's exploits, of his alliance with the creatures they had been taught to hate. He had begun to question the council's narrative, the truth of their pronouncements. But he was afraid. Afraid of what he might find if he looked too closely, afraid of what he might have to do. Augustus, sensing Everett's inner turmoil, placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance, of camaraderie. "We are the last hope for humanity, Everett," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We cannot allow sentimentality, nostalgia for a lost friendship, to cloud our judgment. We must do what is necessary to protect Bastion, to ensure its survival, even if it means making difficult choices." He gave Everett a firm nod. "Prepare the men. We launch a full-scale offensive at dawn. We will wipe out the feral threat once and for all, and we will bring Corin back, one way or another." As Everett turned to leave, Augustus called after him, his voice low and menacing. "And Everett," he added, "if Corin resists, if he chooses to stand with the ferals, eliminate him. He is no longer one of us. He is the enemy." Everett paused, his back to Augustus, his hand on the door. He took a deep breath, then turned. "Yes, sir. He will be dealt with." As the door closed behind Everett, Augustus turned back to the window, his eyes locked on the city below. The fate of Bastion, the fate of humanity, rested on his shoulders. He would not fail. He would do whatever it took to protect his city, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Even if it meant becoming the very monster he had sworn to destroy. The air in the caves was thick with the smell of damp earth and the musky odor of the ferals, a scent that had once been repulsive but was now strangely comforting. It was the smell of home, of my new family. We were deep in the heart of the wasteland, miles from Bastion, in a network of natural caves that Crete and his people had discovered and fortified. It was a defensible position, a temporary refuge, but it wouldn't withstand a full-scale assault from the cleansers. We had been preparing for weeks, ever since our scouts had reported increased activity around Bastion. We knew that Augustus wouldn't let our actions, our very existence, go unpunished. He would come for us, with all the force he could muster, and we had to be ready. My time with the Ferals had changed me, molded me into something new, something different. I was no longer just a cleanser, trained to kill. I was a leader, a strategist, a bridge between two worlds. I had learned their language, their customs, their strengths, and their weaknesses. And I had shared my knowledge of Bastion, of the cleansers, of their tactics and weaponry. Crete and I stood side by side studying a crudely drawn map of the surrounding terrain. He was a natural leader, strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of his people. We were an unlikely pair, a human and a feral, united by a common enemy and a shared dream of a different future. "They will come from the east," Crete said, his voice a series of percussive clicks and rasps, his clawed hand tracing a line on the map. "That is their most likely approach." "Yes," I agreed. "And they'll use their heavy vehicles, their energy weapons. We need to use the terrain to our advantage, create choke points, funnel them into areas where we can ambush them." I pointed to a narrow canyon on the map. "Here," I said, "we can set traps, use the high ground to rain down projectiles. And here," I indicated a cluster of ruined buildings, "we can use the rubble for cover, create a kill zone." We spent hours poring over the map, planning, strategizing, trying to anticipate Augustus's every move. We knew we were outnumbered, but we had something the cleansers didn't: the will to fight for our very existence, for our right to live in this world. We were fighting for our survival, for our freedom. But it wasn't just about survival, it was also about justice. It was about exposing the Council's lies, about revealing the truth to the people of Bastion. I had spent weeks modifying a captured cleanser communication device, boosting its signal, altering its frequency. My plan was to broadcast a message to Bastion, to bypass the Council's controlled information network and speak directly to the people. I would tell them the truth about the Ferals, about Gideon, about my parents, about the Council's crimes. I would show them that the Ferals were not the monsters they had been led to believe, but victims, survivors, just like them. I had to make them see. I owed it to Gideon, to my parents, to the Ferals, and to myself. I had to show them that there was another way, a different path, a future where humans and Ferals could coexist. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and purple, I knew that the time had come. The cleansers were on the move. The battle was about to begin. I looked at Crete, at the other Ferals gathered in the cave, their faces grim, determined. They were ready. And so was I. The dust cloud on the horizon, a swirling brown mass that blotted out the pale light of the rising sun, was visible even from our vantage point deep within the caves. The cleanser army was approaching. We had known it was coming, had prepared for it as best we could, but seeing it, the sheer scale of it, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. They were numerous. I tightened my grip on my modified pulse rifle, a symbol of my past, a tool for my uncertain future. It was a cleanser weapon, taken from a fallen soldier, but I had altered it, modifying its energy output, its targeting systems. It was now a weapon that could be used against my former comrades, against the very force I had once served. The battle began as the first rays of the sun breached the horizon. The cleansers advanced in a seemingly impenetrable wave, their armored vehicles churning up the dust, their energy weapons spitting bolts of blue-white energy that seared the air and left trails of ionized gas in their wake. They came on with crushing force, their movements disciplined, a product of their training and their technology. Their numbers were overwhelming. We met them in the canyon, just as we had planned. The narrow passage, chosen for its strategic value, became a crucible of violence. The ferals, using their knowledge of the terrain, their agility, and their natural camouflage, launched a series of ambushes, raining down rocks from the high ground, attacking from the shadows of the ruined buildings that lined the canyon walls. The air filled with the sounds of battle. The sharp crack of pulse rifles, the guttural cries of the ferals, the roar of explosions, and the screams of the wounded. I fought alongside them, my pulse rifle spitting bolts of energy that found their mark, each shot a painful reminder of my past, of the life I had left behind. I saw ferals fall, their chitinous bodies ripped apart by cleanser fire. I saw cleansers die, their armor pierced by the ferals' claws, their screams cut short by the brutal efficiency of their attacks. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle, a whirlwind of violence and death. We were slowly being overwhelmed. The canyon, our chosen battleground, became a graveyard. The ground was littered with the bodies of the dead, both human and feral, their blood mingling with the dust and the dirt. I fought on, driven by a desperate hope, a fierce determination to protect the ferals, to atone for my past, to expose the Council's lies. But their numbers were seemingly endless. We were being pushed back, driven deeper into the canyon, towards our settlement, towards the heart of our fragile community. I saw the fear in the eyes of the ferals, the desperation in their movements. They were fighting for their lives, for their future, but they were losing. We were losing. It was then I decided to enact my plan. I turned to Crete, his massive form a reassuring presence amidst the chaos. "I'm going!" I shouted over the din of battle. "I have to try to reach Bastion, to broadcast the truth." "Go," he rasped, his voice a series of rapid clicks. "We will hold them off as long as we can." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of the moment. This could be the last time I saw him, the last time I saw any of them. I turned and sprinted towards the rear of the canyon, towards a narrow passage that led to a network of tunnels, a path that would take me towards Bastion. I moved like a ghost, using the skills Gideon had taught me and the knowledge of the terrain I had gained from the ferals, slipping past cleanser patrols and evading their sensors. I emerged from the tunnels, blinking against the sudden brightness. I was on the outskirts of Bastion, in a sector that had been abandoned after the war, a no-man's land of ruined buildings and overgrown streets. The city stood before me, its walls a stark reminder of the division, the fear, the lies that had fueled this conflict. I made my way towards the city's communication center, the heart of the Council's propaganda machine, a towering structure that dominated the skyline. It was heavily guarded, but I had a plan. I had studied the blueprints, identified a weakness, a blind spot in their security. Using my cleanser training and knowledge of their protocols, I bypassed their patrols and slipped through their defenses, a ghost in the shadows. I reached the communication center, the hum of its powerful transmitters vibrating through the floor. This was it, my one chance to expose the truth. I connected my modified communication device to the network and began to broadcast. "People of Bastion," I said, my voice amplified by the city's communication network, reaching every corner of the city, every home, every screen. "My name is Corin. I was a cleanser, like many of you, but I have seen the truth. The ferals are not the monsters we have been told. They are survivors, victims, just like us. They were once human, but they were changed, twisted by the bioweapon, by the war that ravaged our world." I told them everything. About Gideon, about my parents, about the Council's lies, about the massacre of the scientists who had tried to make peace. I showed them images of the feral settlement, of their society, of their attempts to rebuild, images captured by my own camera during my time with them. I pleaded with them to open their eyes, to see the ferals not as enemies but as fellow beings, deserving of compassion, of understanding. "The Council has lied to you," I said, my voice rising with passion. "They have used your fear to control you, to maintain their grip on power. They have sacrificed your sons and daughters, your friends and neighbors, to perpetuate a war that serves only their own selfish ends. Augustus is a monster, hiding behind a wall of lies and deceit. My broadcast was met with a storm of reactions. I could hear the shouts of the guards and the panicked voices of the citizens. Some, I knew, would dismiss my words as the ravings of a traitor, the lies of a feral sympathizer. But others, I hoped, would listen, would understand, would see the truth that had been hidden from them for so long. Suddenly, the door burst open and a squad of cleansers rushed in, their rifles raised. They were led by Everett. "Corin," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "It's over. It doesn't have to be this way, Everett. You know the truth. You've seen what they are." "They're monsters, Corin," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "They killed my family. They killed your family." "No," I said. "The council did. Augustus did. They used the ferals as scapegoats, as a way to control us, to keep us afraid." Everett hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the other cleansers. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the doubt that I had planted there. He had always been a good man, a loyal friend. But he was also afraid of the truth, afraid of what it would mean to betray everything he had ever known. "It's too late, Corin," he said quietly. "It's too late for all of us." A new voice echoed through the room, a voice filled with rage and authority. "It's never too late to do what's right." It was Augustus. He strode into the room, his eyes blazing with fury, his face contorted with hatred. He was flanked by two enforcers, their faces hidden behind their black helmets, their hands gripping their pulse rifles. They were his personal guard, his executioners, fanatically loyal, devoid of any humanity. "Corin," Augustus said, his voice dripping with venom. "You traitorous piece of trash. You dare to defy me? You dare to side with those things?" "They're not things," I said, my voice rising to meet his. "They're victims, just like us. You made them what they are. You used them, manipulated them, just like you used us." Augustus laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through the room. "You naive fool," he said. "You think you can change anything? You think you can stop the inevitable? I am the one who brought order to this chaos. I am the one who protected Bastion. I am the one who will save humanity, even if I have to kill every last one of those mutated freaks to do it." He raised his hand, signaling the enforcers. "Kill him," he ordered. "Kill them all." The enforcers raised their rifles, their fingers tightening on the triggers. Everett stood frozen, caught between his loyalty to Augustus, his friendship with me, and the dawning realization of the truth. Then, everything happened at once. Everett turned his rifle on the enforcers, firing a burst of energy that caught them by surprise. They fell, their bodies convulsing as the energy bolts ripped through them. At the same moment, I dove for cover as the remaining cleansers opened fire, the room filling with the sharp crack of pulse rifles. Everett, now a traitor in the eyes of the council, fought alongside me, his rifle spitting bolts of energy that cut down the cleansers who had once been his comrades. He had made his choice. He had chosen to fight for what was right, even if it meant betraying everything he had ever known. The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. I saw Everett take a hit, a bolt of energy that pierced his armor, sending him to the floor. "Everett!" I cried, cradling his head in my arms. "Hang in there!" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain but also with a sense of peace. I had to do it, Corin," he whispered, his voice weak. "I had to make it right." "You did," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You did!" He smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that quickly faded. His eyes closed, and his body went limp. He was gone. My friend, my brother, had sacrificed himself to save me, to save the ferals, to save Bastion. Augustus, enraged by Everett's betrayal and the death of his enforcers, charged at me, his eyes blazing with fury. He was a powerful man, skilled in combat, but he was also blinded by rage, driven by a desperate need to maintain control. He was stronger than me, more experienced, but I had something he didn't, the burning conviction of a man who had nothing left to lose. I managed to disarm him, knocking his weapon from his hand. He stepped back in disbelief, his eyes full of fear and surprise. He was no longer the all-powerful leader of Bastion, but a desperate man, stripped of his authority, his control. "It's over, Augustus, it's all over!" He looked at me, his face contorted with hatred. You can't win," he spat. "You can't stop the inevitable. They are monsters and they must be destroyed." "No," I said. "They are not monsters. You are. And they deserve to exist, just like you and me." Then something unexpected happened. The surviving cleansers, those who had witnessed Everett's sacrifice and Augustus's madness, lowered their weapons. They had seen the truth, and they were no longer willing to fight for a lie. Augustus, seeing that he was alone, that his power had evaporated, that his reign of terror was over, let out a cry of anguish, a howl of despair. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat, his eyes filled with a desperate, animalistic rage. I reacted instinctively, my training kicking in. I sidestepped his attack, grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. He cried out in pain, his body convulsing. I slammed him against the wall, my forearm pressing against his throat, cutting off his air supply. He struggled, his face turning red, his eyes bulging. But he was no match for me. He was weak, broken, his power gone. I could have killed him. I could have ended his life right then and there. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw not a monster, but a broken man, a man consumed by his own fear, his own ambition. The fighting outside had ceased. The surviving cleansers, those who had not fled, had laid down their arms. They had seen the truth, and they were no longer willing to fight. The citizens of Bastion, those who had dared to listen to my broadcast, had taken to the streets, demanding an end to the conflict, an end to the council's rule. In the days that followed, a new order was established in Bastion. The council was disbanded, its members arrested, their crimes exposed. A provisional government was formed, made up of representatives from the human population, including some of the cleansers who had turned against Augustus, and a diverse group of citizens who had been vocal about their opposition to the old regime. Augustus, stripped of his power and authority, was brought before the newly formed provisional government. He stood, defiant to the last, his eyes filled with a lingering hatred. Exile was a fate worse than death for a man like him. He was to be banished to the wasteland, to the very place he had taught everyone to fear and despise. He was given meager supplies, and a warning that returning to Bastion would result in immediate execution. Stripped of his authority and his dignity, Augustus was escorted to the gates of Bastion and forced out into the wasteland, alone. A collective sense of liberation swept through the city as the gates closed behind him, a symbolic end to his reign of terror. A liaison position was created, a point of contact between the humans and the ferals. I was asked to fill this role, to act as a bridge between the two groups. It was a difficult and often frustrating position, but I accepted it, knowing that it was the first, small step towards a different future. The walls of Bastion, both physical and metaphorical, began to crumble, not in a sudden dramatic collapse, but slowly, brick by brick, prejudice by prejudice. One of the first acts of this new government was to commission a monument in honor of Everett, a symbol of sacrifice and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, courage and compassion could prevail. The ferals, no longer hunted, no longer persecuted, were allowed to return to a designated area within the city limits. They were still viewed with suspicion, with fear, by many humans, but they were no longer seen as monsters, as enemies. They were survivors, just like the humans, and they had earned their right to exist. The road ahead was long and difficult. The scars of the past, the legacy of hatred and violence, would be slow to heal. But as I looked out at the faces of the humans and ferals gathered in the city square, I saw a fragile but real possibility of a different kind of future. Everett was dead, hailed as a hero who had sacrificed himself to save Bastion from Augustus's tyranny. He was given a hero's funeral, his name added to the list of those who had died to protect the city. Crete was also gone, killed in the final battle to hold off the cleanser advance. He died a warrior's death, defending his people, his home. His death left a void among the ferals, a void that I, despite my best intentions, could never fill. I found myself adrift, no longer belonging to either world, a solitary figure walking a lonely path between two wary camps. I was a symbol of a conflict that had ended in a stalemate, a victory that felt more like a defeat. I was hailed as a hero by some, as a traitor by others, but mostly I was seen as an outsider, a reminder of a past that many wanted to forget. I was even exiled by most of the humans, forced to live on the fringes of Bastion. From the hill, the ravaged wasteland stretched before me, Bastion's ruins a distant silhouette against the dying light. I am alone, haunted by the faces of Crete, Everett, and countless others, forever burned into my memory. I stand here often watching, replaying the choices that led to this fractured peace. Below, near the broken wall, human and feral children play, their mingled shouts and laughter a fragile counterpoint to the silence of the dead. They are the new generation, born into a changed world, where the old definitions of human and monster are fading. This dawn is different, deeply scarred by the past, the future uncertain. It was a Pyrrhic victory, bought at a terrible price, a victory that tastes of ashes, not triumph. Yet, as I watch the children, I know the struggle for a better future continues, passed on like a flickering torch. They will have to learn from our past, find their own path towards a truly new dawn. They must, for all our sakes.